Hello and welcome to Sociology in Australia, an episode produced for the International Sociological Association's Sociology in podcast series, which showcases the many ways sociology is practiced, taught and imagined around the world. I'm Sally Daly, Executive Officer of the Australian Sociological Association, a role I've had the privilege of holding for the past 17 years. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we live, work, and record this podcast. I'm speaking to you from Wurundjeri country of the Kulin Nation. Our discussion facilitator, Professor Alphia Possamai-Inesedy, and guest Dr. Rhys Gower are both joining this podcast from Gadigal country of the Eora Nation. And Morgan Carter is joining us from the lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung and Tongarung peoples of the Kulin Nation. Together, we pay our deep respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening to this podcast. We recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. In this podcast episode, the focus will be on two significant TASA-funded national research projects that offer a snapshot of Australian sociology today. The first is Mapping Sociology in Australia, a project in its final stages where Alphia and Rhys have examined factors such as the quality of Australian sociological research outputs, sociological research specialisations, and the staffing profile, to name a few. The second project is the mapping of the Indigenisation of the sociology curriculum in higher education. Morgan has been exploring how and where Indigenous knowledges and perspectives are being embedded in sociology within higher education across Australia. To take us into this important conversation, I'll now hand you over to Alphia, immediate past president of the Australian Sociological Association, who will facilitate the discussion with Rhys Gower and Morgan Carter.
Thank you, Sally, and thank you for the invitation to have this conversation. I really am looking forward to this discussion on the work that's been done by both Rhys and Morgan in relation to better understanding the status of sociology, particularly now in Australia, where the higher education sector is under considerable strain, and we're seeing a number of higher education institutions respond by cutting a number of programs, and at times our discipline gets caught up in that. So I think it's quite an important time to look at where we are right now. So looking forward to speaking about Rhys, who has looked at this over the last decade in Australia, and Morgan, who has been looking at the indigenization of the discipline. So I'm going to start with you, Rhys. Looking across the last decade, how would you characterize the status of sociology in Australia? Has it lost ground or just changed shape?
I would say it has definitely changed shape. Looking at the statistics with regards to areas such as sociological research outputs measured against global standards, universities, the number of universities that offer sociology as a major. I would certainly say that sociology just generally is quite healthy in Australia. However, there are a lot of indications, I would say, that sociology is changing shape, that perhaps while still very much present within the higher education sector, maybe it's being used or being seen as offering something different than it has in the past. So probably one of the biggest indications of that, I would say, is there are certainly indications of sociology being increasingly embedded within or working in service to other degree programs within Australian universities. So in this particular instance, there are, as part of the mapping sociology projects, as part of our research methods, we've actually conducted a total of 5 focus group sessions with 19 representatives of social science and sociology departments from 17 separate Australian universities. And 12 of the 19 total university representatives who participated in the focus groups suggested sociology is actually becoming a service-oriented discipline. So a discipline which informs or works in service to other disciplines, whether through teaching, whether through research, or actually in preparing graduates for careers outside of sociology. So I would certainly say that's probably the one of the key interesting findings we've found so far for the Mapping Sociology project.
Yeah, that's really useful. I mean, we did end up really seeing that sociology is everywhere, but hidden in many ways. And that service discipline aspect became a really strong component. I want to hop over to Morgan, and the work that you've done. You worked at that intersection of sociology and Indigenous knowledges. So what does that mean to you to indigenize the discipline?
I think it means a couple of things moving forward within the sociology space. I think that it means not only embedding First Nations perspective and culture into current sociology subjects, but also looking at ways that we can embed those knowledges into like sociology theories and look at ways that it could have been embedded in the past as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the history of sociology, there's a lot missing, right? There's a lot missing in regards to its formation and its development within Australia, where it really didn't take off properly until post-war World War II. But there's so much that could have been done in that space for those sort of theories that evolved from this space. But Rhys, that makes me think about the trends that you were mapping, that you mapped in research. You did some really interesting analysis of those trends. Can you speak to that in terms of what you found in the research space?
In terms of research specialization?
Yes, yes.
Most certainly. The most popular research specialization cited during the focus group stage was undeniably migration, ethnicity, and multiculturalism. So while other areas were highly cited, I think it came in second place was sociology of health and illness, third place was cultural sociology, but the clear leader in that respect was migration, ethnicity, and multiculturalism. Now, this parallels quite highly with TARS's own thematic group membership, where where groups surrounding ethnicity and multiculturalism are very much within the top most popular groups. So there is certainly interest there among plenty of sociologists.
And so then I would imagine that there could be some really good intersections there in regards to what Morgan was just arguing. But before I move back to Morgan, Rhys, I wanted to ask you, I know you did that really deep dive into the research mapping, the funding mapping. We were trying to get an understanding of enrollments, and it was just so difficult. But, you know, we did the best we could. And staffing. Can I ask what surprised you most about what you found?
Well, the last one, staffing, I found was particularly interesting. The staffing profile of sociology in Australia, it actually contrasts quite significantly on the topic of gender. So when considering FTE employed positions, women actually outnumber men across all full-time categories in sociology, apart from level E, which is professor or equivalent. So this not only includes levels A through D, but also in relation to non-academic roles. So, and this represents a significant contrast when compared to the average per discipline across all recognized disciplines in Australia, wherein men outnumber women in all full-time categories except for level B. So that places sociology in quite a significant contrast to the majority, the average of all other academic disciplines recognized by the Research Council, in the sense that yeah, women represent the majority across all levels. However, level E still remains the exception.
Yeah, that's really, I won't say it's surprising, but I do think we'll see that a shift that and it's probably already taking place, that women are going to be the majority in the E space and in the professoriate space as well.
Yes, I just wanted to add to that as well. The latest data I was actually able to gather in that
Great.
particular respect when it comes to this FTE employed positions, that's actually from 2018, 2019. So I imagine the situation has undoubtedly changed as a result of obviously the last few years and including events such as COVID, no doubt.
Yeah. Morgan, I'm interested. Rhys was just speaking there before about research concentration, and you were speaking about, what indigenization of sociology means to you. I'm curious if you feel, I mean, we're speaking about sociology here, but this can readily be pertained to all disciplines, really. But do you think that we're ready for the transformation, or do you think that there's still resistance, structurally or culturally, within higher education for the indigenization of curriculum as a whole?
I think there's definitely still resistance for the Indigenisation of curriculum as a whole. However, I do think there is a lot of people, both Indigenous and allies alike, who are actively working within this space and making big steps and progress into the Indigenisation of the space in sociology particularly. However, I do think there is structural barriers that will continue to be there and will be there for some time. I think it is going to take a lot of dedication from not only higher education institutes, but also government level organisations like TASA, everyone kind of playing their part to really make the structural changes within the higher education curriculum.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think that there are some great strides being made, and there's some really powerful voices. But I'm curious. I mean, there's a really nice sort of intersection emerging as Rhys's work is pointing to a discipline that has changed shape but is resilient, that is still there, but I can see is somewhat threatened at the same time, particularly what's happening in the sector. So working in this space and then working on the indigenization of sociology as well at the same time. I mean, these are really important functions for the discipline and for higher education as a whole to take on. Rhys, that brings us to that concept of service discipline. And I said it before, sociology is everywhere but nowhere. What do you make of sociology's role as a service discipline? Is that a strength or a risk?
Perhaps a little of each. I would certainly say that it's a strength in the sense of there is certainly demand for the skills that sociology inherently teaches. That's certainly what we're getting from the focus group sessions. So just to give you an indication, yeah, so I mentioned before that 12 of the 19 total university representatives who participated in the focus groups, they suggested sociology is becoming a service-oriented discipline. Yeah, 5 of them claim that sociology units are taught across their university, and they're informing areas including health, social work, law, tourism, engineering, even the natural sciences. And we've been trying to really focus on, well, what are these skills that these fields are effectively looking for? And we wanted to find out what sociology actually offers that they find so valuable. And so when queried, focus group participants most frequently cited research methods and skills. That data collection, interviewing, surveying, all these skills that are naturally taught as part of a sociology major. These are the sort of things that are in demand. So that does represent a strength. It means that, well, different industries, different fields naturally want the skills that sociology teaches. But it does represent a risk, because we have to ask ourselves, what does this mean for sociology in and of itself? What does this mean for the, say, theoretical grounding of sociology that's always been associated with the field, the long-standing theoretical tradition, the lenses, your Marx, your Durkheims, your Webers, all this sort of thing? Are they going to be seen as perhaps less relevant moving into the future? So yes, in answering your question, yeah, it is both a strength, but there is risk inherent to it. We don't we don't know what it's going to mean for sociology in and of itself, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there, which I want to return to, but what you're saying there in terms of the service discipline and what's being emphasized, and you were emphasizing like what is being called upon from us, and there's those research methods there, that's a real strength of the discipline. But Morgan, that does make me think, if we're thinking about sociology with strength in service discipline and strength in providing these research method frameworks, but as well as in bringing the sociological frameworks to other disciplines as well, which we see happen in the health area quite strongly. If we go back to your work, there's that growing emphasis on co-design, yarning methods, Indigenous-led research. How do you see that sort of feeding into what Rhys is saying, and how do you see that we could really move beyond inclusion to something that's much more structurally significant?
I do think this is something that's kind of already starting to be done. As part of my research, I conducted interviews with academics in universities, and doing that, I utilized a yarning style interview method, which is something that is becoming much more common. There's research about it. It's becoming quite embedded within the research field, and really identified as a way that is a much more inclusive and culturally safe way to particularly do research on First Nations communities and individuals. I also think it's important to continue to grow those areas, make sure that it's really promoted, the positive outcomes that can come from this. I do think First Nations communities are a population group that has been very heavily researched, and often by non-Indigenous people, by institutions, organisations, and they are often then not privy to the results either. So also highlighting the importance of sharing knowledge after, making sure quotes were used correctly, making sure the right lens is placed over the research is also an important thing that needs to be embedded.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a really significant work that's going on in the method space, but also in the data sovereignty space, and respect and ways to approach data sovereignty that I think we've come some way, but need to go much further, and really need to, I find, in the role that I have now within my university, which is more of an executive role, but having those conversations around data sovereignty as well for the overall university. And how do you have those conversations? So like, it's a really important space that I think the discipline can also participate in. Rhys, when you were speaking before about the risks and the potential risks toward theoretical developments, I'm reminded of Beck and his zombie categories, right? And reminded of his argument about if you think back to his arguments on our discipline and pretty much the crisis he was pointing to, and the last book that he wrote before his death was pointing to, our metamorphosis, because where we were, what was there, we can't use in the same way. It's not relevant anymore in the world that they're in. So what you're presenting as a risk isn't an opportunity.
An opportunity?
Yeah.
How would you figure the opportunity?
An opportunity in the sense of if we go back to Beck's argument around the zombie categories and his arguments that he presented or was creating in Metamorphosis, if you were pointing out the risks, sorry, I'm sort of going down a little rabbit hole all by myself, but you were pointing out the risks that you saw in us becoming a service discipline, and you were concerned about the theories and the implication toward theoretical development and our theoretical foundations. But I'm saying, is there an opportunity here that we can be taking, particularly when you see scholars like Beck who pointed toward the theoretical crisis we're in? And if we also take as an opportunity the indigenization of sociology at the same time and its methods, like there could be something here that's evolving through this change that we're in.
Oh, absolutely. But I'm sure a lot of critics would look at this change and just see it. Yes, on one hand, it's more utilitarian. We're very much, adapting to serve and help other disciplines. But by the same token, it's simply, they could say it's simply a market-oriented approach, or perhaps even a neoliberal one. But it was Beck himself who actually believed that sociology can have some usefulness, especially outside to other disciplines, or obviously influencing policy and influencing the social world. And he does acknowledge that something interesting that he brought up was, I believe he said that when sociology leaves the field, it often loses its sociology-ness. But he felt that was a complete natural aspect of what sociology does. It's, it loses its sociology-ness, but it has its inherent usefulness, and people acknowledge that. It just doesn't get credited to sociology. So perhaps it is effectively just an extension of that. What Beck, I believe he did that about 20 years ago, actually predicted was already happening. So maybe it's simply a continuation of that. So it is something we did kind of allude to when we were going through the research data, and a lot of our interview participants tended to agree with the statement that society, a lot of people, or we can speak to Australia, don't really know what is sociological in nature. So perhaps it is continuing on with that particular idea. So while sociology is, may continue or may diminish it being a field in and of itself, its inherent usefulness might continue, but a problem with that, another risk associated with that, is, do people actually know the contribution that we're making?
I think that came out really strongly in those focus groups. We heard quite a few people that were pointing to that, and the need for the discipline to assert its expertise and contributions. But Morgan, thinking about the sociological tools, the critical theory, the research methods that we've been speaking about. I know that we've been speaking about their indigenization, but do you think that the tools that we have, that toolbox that sociologists have, do you think they're well suited to working with alongside Indigenous communities?
I think based on some of the research that aspects in sociology which I also will note when I was looking at it was a lot of units, as has been mentioned. They were units across many disciplines, many courses within universities, and many held the capacity to include Indigenous perspectives within them. I think that they were areas that were missed that had really high value and are not only, they can not only be transferable to First Nations communities, but they're often themes that are reflected within other minority groups, such as refugees and the LGBTQ community. There are a lot of common themes that are kind of reflected within that space. I think that with enough work, everything can be indigenized, has the capacity to have those perspectives embedded. And if that means it's changed a little so that, you know, interview styles become yarning interview methods so that they're a little bit more inclusive and they're more culturally appropriate, then I think there are changes that probably do need to be made to make sure that the discipline can be culturally respective of the First Nations people of Australia.
Yeah, no, thank you, Morgan. So I'm conscious of the time here. I think with the work that you've both done, we could talk for a really long time, but I'm going to end with well, maybe we'll have a little follow-up, but there's one more substantial question for the both of you. So Rhys, starting with you, if you were designing a strategy to reposition sociology in Australia, what's the one bold move the discipline should make now?
That is a very interesting and difficult question. I think what we tapped into before about just the general population not knowing exactly what is sociological in nature is perhaps one of the biggest challenges facing the field. So I'm not sure at exactly what means it could actually be done. It's not really my field of expertise, but certainly I think educating the populace just a bit more on what sociology is would perhaps go a long way in furthering the field with this new service orientation. But also just create a general recognition of the value that sociology actually brings, not only academia, but to general society.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll put that into our recommendations as we finalize the report. My brain went into a lot of spaces there. But Morgan, what about you? Particularly when you were thinking about, you know, the indigenization of sociology, what would be that big bold move on your side if you were sort of saying this is a strategy for the discipline moving forward?
I think that one of the biggest things and something that was really noticeable when doing my research was how siloed universities are. They are all working on little things, all doing steps forward in this space. But a lot of them are repeating work. A lot of them are doing the same first initial steps that other universities are doing. So I think a really important first step is that kind of collaboration between higher education institutions to get a really strong strategy in place on how Indigenisation across sociology within the higher education sector in Australia as a whole needs to move forward.
Yes, I think you've picked up on a really, you know, it's a quality of higher education institutions that they do tend to be siloed, and a lot of energy is being spent I think as you're pointing to in non-productive ways. If we could just share this best practice, if we could share the challenges, the opportunities, we could be using the limited resources we have and really amplifying the work that needs to be done across both those spaces. Well, I want to thank both of you for the really important work that you've done. I know that Morgan, your work has been tabled, and Rhys, the report that you and I are finalizing will be finalized for the upcoming Australian Sociological Association conference in November of this year. So, and then it will be made readily available through the TASA website. So thank you both for your time It's been really great speaking to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.